Good morning, everyone, and welcome to ICP's AEO and GEO webinar. We will give maybe a minute for folks to join so that we can get started, but I wanted to give us all a chance to introduce ourselves on the ICP side. I'm Jeremy Bright. I will be moderating today and doing a little bit of talking, but not a ton. I'm a global solution specialist at ICP, which generally means that I help support in lots of conversations about what does our solution look like with our clients. And I've been doing content operations in one form or another for about 15 plus years. We'll just put a plus rather than a specific number. Let me pass to Carla to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on your time zone. So I am Global Head of Digital Shelf Solutions at ICP. So essentially building out the service lines and the offerings that ICP can bring to clients in the digital shelf space. So that spans from PIM, PXM, digital shelf analytics, organizational change, data modeling. And now as we venture into the world of agentic, also services around optimizing for AEO and GEO. I also act as an executive consultant on projects with clients, focusing on those areas as well and advising senior stakeholders on strategy. And my colleague Tom is with us.
Thanks, Carla. Hi, everybody. Tom Sloan. I'm the Global Solutions Lead for Content Management and Logistics at ICP. Spend my time working with our customers to help elevate and mature the practice of digital asset management specifically. And so that includes really looking at content lifecycle from initiation to publication to the world. So thanks for having me, Carla and Jeremy.
So we have quite a bit to get through today, and we're going to go ahead and dig in. First step, while I figure out my screen share situation, is AEO and GEO are not a game changer. They actually expose gaps in your content, which means your content itself, your content ecosystem, the way that you're operating as an organization. It is a way of showing what you don't yet have, but need in order to be effective in the space. Before we get into that, let's actually talk about what AEO and GEO are a bit. Carla, can you start us off?
Definitely. So really AEO and GEO are taking us to the next phase of search. So we used to always optimize for search engine optimizations, SEO. You'll have had teams in those areas for years, optimizing on focusing on clicks. So ensuring that the consumer is actually clicking through to go through that funnel to purchase. And you could optimize in many ways, focusing around keywords and making sure your schema markup was correct to feed those search algorithms. So now we're on a separate journey where we're not just using the regular search algorithms, but we're having conversations with generative engines such as ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, etc. When we're having conversations as consumers with those generative engines, we're looking as a brand then to be included in those answers. So when a consumer is speaking to them, they're essentially interacting with a large language model that is going out and sourcing information about your product. As a brand, your goal is to be included in those answers, whatever those questions might be. By similar but contrast, agentic engine optimization is where an actual agent of sorts is going to complete and make a decision on behalf of the consumer. So that might be selecting the product, recommending the product, or in some cases going on to purchase the product. Those agents, again, are going out looking for accurate and factual information about your product. And so we're now in this realm where we need to optimize for all of these different ways a consumer is interacting online in order to research and discover our products. So traditional SEO fails on the AI shelf because the agents are evaluating things beyond just keywords and backlinks. And we'll get into what it is that they're looking for as we help you drive a strategy towards this new channel.
Well, speaking of how they actually work, Tom.
Yeah, so without sort of trying to get too much into the technical detail, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the background when we're engaging with these models and engines, and this is something that anyone that's used ChatGPT or Claude or other models are available will be experiencing, whether they know it or not. So ultimately, a user or a consumer is asking natural language questions of AI models and engines, and the machines are digesting that question, understanding that question, and they're looking around digital and online properties to find sort of matching references and content that relates to an answer to those queries. It's looking at unstructured and structured content, but it's also looking deeper than that at how that content and data is being presented, what metadata or non-obvious or non-readable, non-human readable information about that content or those images or those videos is existing to substantiate its sort of validity and how applicable it is in answering the question. It's then looking to assemble, a response, and part of that response assembly is evaluating the trustworthiness and the consistency of what it's been able to find, and prioritizing answers, facts, details, content that it believes is highly trustworthy and close to true source of truth. It's then passing that once more and providing a natural language response to the original query, and it's trying to make sure that it's capable of referencing where it found that information and really trying to legitimize sort of its answer upon further querying. So yes, it's question response, but there's a lot of analysis, understanding, weighting, and evaluation that's going on in the background, and I think that's sort of where the magic happens for businesses and brands in terms of maturing in their capabilities or their success from an AEO and GEO perspective.
Something just to add there, Tom, is, whilst the consumer is getting answers, the user in this scenario may never actually click through, browse, or visit your actual product page. They're having this interaction within an interface, and that's why the digital shelf is kind of evolving, because digital shelf, as we think about it, is the Amazon, the Tesco, your own brand website. But actually the shelf is now the answer in the interface itself. That's how your product is going to show up to that consumer. So this is where we have to think about, what brand control do you have over the information about your product and brand everywhere that it could possibly be mentioned that these agents reach out to find information from.
And especially where you don't necessarily, like you say, Carla, have control over the interface. You don't have control over how things are visually presented in terms of layout, in terms of branding. You really sort of become reliant on the consistency and the accuracy and the tonality and the way in which these products or experiences or brand characteristics are articulated, rather than being able to direct people to a really sort of curated website or a curated experience that's dedicated to your business or your brand or your product in that way.
So it sounds like the risk here is that you're no longer the only voice for your products, your brands, your product line. Now there's a higher stress on being the authoritative source of information for your products. Is that right?
Yes, certainly, and there are advantages to being the authoritative source, even if that's not necessarily what's presented today. In an AEO and GEO experience, there's sort of tools and capabilities at your disposal that can help you get there, more than say fan pages or other individual contributors to product reviews or whatever might be able to bring about. So still lots of opportunity, even if you find yourselves not quite yet the source on these channels.
So Tom, talk me through what AEO and GEO engines are actually looking for in terms of content and data.
Well, it's quite broad and it can get quite technical. So we'll use this sort of diagram and this sort of framework to understand the multitude of things that AEO and GEO are looking for and are evaluating when they're thinking about what is the right response to provide for a specific query. At the end of the day, single source of truth for facts and attributes is sort of the foundational sort of base layer. That's really where things start. And as we move up, this pyramid here. It's iterative multipliers on confidence, right? That the engines are then applying to really convince themselves that the information that they found or the content they found is the right thing to play back to a particular query. And without going through sort of each one of these things line by line, when we think about facts, consistent representation, schema completeness, relationships, taxonomy consistency, for me, there's sort of like a subtext here as to what good looks like, or what good foundations look like for driving at success in these channels. And I think to just almost oversimplify, I'd boil them down to you need a not just a good data strategy, but it needs to be well implemented and well governed. You can say the same about content strategy in terms of how it's thought through, how it's implemented across different digital properties or capabilities, and again, governance, around how that iterates and how that evolves. And then sort of pulling all these things together really is the right technology ecosystem integrated and aligned to that data and content strategy and governance to enable the appropriate sort of publication, distribution, visibility of these things in the right places. So for someone that sort of has a content operations background and is an advocate for intelligently connected content ecosystems and good governance, it's sort of music to my ears that now there's this really obvious business benefit to bringing these things out of the concept and into reality for businesses and brands.
Yeah, I think from our collective experience, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, Tom and Carla, this is where we're seeing a stronger pattern maybe than we would have seen in the past at folks tying together multiple pieces of their organization into a more consistent program. And so we're talking about content strategy alongside data strategy, alongside tech infrastructure strategy, because they're all needed in order to make this content exposed in the right way so that you become the authoritative source for yourself, rather than allowing a Reddit post by a disgruntled person to drive the conversation inside of an answer or agentic or generative content engine.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think this is where taking the maybe quite extreme example of a long form Reddit post as the alternative view here. Yes, okay, there might be lots of references to a particular product or a particular experience or a particular something. It can be referenced consistently. Maybe this person is posting it all over the place, not just on Reddit. But ultimately, that individual is unlikely to have an enterprise tech stack at their beck and call that's ready to expose consistent data points and taxonomy and sort of this consistency across the back of their written content, right? And I think that's why businesses will always have this opportunity to install themselves as the proper authority, with the right approach and with the right thinking. So it's an extreme example, but I think that sort of does the job of ensuring that we understand that there's lots of opportunity here, and it's not a totally missed boat for any particular business at a given time.
Certainly, and whilst Reddit came up, it's actually relevant because it is a very large source for a lot of these language models. So where brands need to try and create that authority and consistency, it's even something I've heard of clients do where they actually are writing brand sourced community blogs in order to kind of counteract any of the misinformation. And then we've always talked about FAQs, Q&As, hosted within brand websites. It's another way of ensuring that once you understand what consumers are regularly asking about your product, you can start to boil it down to, okay, well, what are the three main characteristics that people are asking about this product? Is it that an item of clothing is waterproof, sustainable, and something else? Or is it, something to do with other characteristics that keep coming up? That way you can start to showcase that information on not just your product pages, in FAQs, in order to ensure that those LLMs can start sourcing accurate ways of responding about your brand.
Sure. And so really what this means is that it's a change for your content operations, from the way that you work, the content that you produce, how you store and manage it, and how you expose it. It's something definitely to consider strongly as everyone is obviously looking at their tech stack day after day about, do I have the right tools? Do I have the right team? Do I have the right process? This way of exposing information is going to impact all of that so that you become the authoritative source. So, Carla, talk us through what that means right now. I've heard recently the term channel-less commerce.
Yeah, there's some great buzzwords. And essentially what channel-less commerce or similar is getting at is that we're no longer just talking about optimizing for a single destination like a product page, a website, or a specific campaign. We're actually talking about content working across all possible channels. And those channels, such as engines, are very different to an Amazon PDP. So that's where the channel list comes in. And the reason why this is an important way of looking at it is a fundamental shift in what content needs to do or what brands need to become today in order to show up in these places, because we're not just creating content as we did previously for single destinations, but because these AI systems are pulling from multiple sources simultaneously, such as retail site, brand content, third-party validation, reviews, what they're then doing is stitching it into the answer. So the question becomes internally for an organization, is content set up to be across all channels, and is it designed to travel? So when I say that, I mean, like, it's not just designed to live in one place and not show up anywhere else, but it's designed to be everywhere it could possibly be read. If it isn't designed that way and it only shows up in one place, it simply won't show, your brand will not be able to show up within those answers that those generative engines or agents are presenting to your consumer. And we just talked about this a little bit around accuracy and consistency, because AI doesn't interpret content or storytelling in the exact same way that humans might do so, because it validates signals for accuracy. So it looks at alignment across those multiple sources. So this is where we start to say, okay, is there repeatable truths about this product or brand that continue to show up? And then, the machines are very able to say, okay, well, this particular fact has shown up enough times that I can believe it as accurate to present to the consumer in front of me. Or I'm getting 20 different answers about this product with no consistency. And so I'm not really sure if that jacket is waterproof because it only says it in one place. And therefore it's just not going to show it up. It's going to look for another product that does meet the criteria of being a repeatable truth in terms of that characteristic or feature. And if your product data or claims about your products, features about your products or messaging don't match across those multiple channels or places it would show up, the implication is that, as I said, you don't show up, so you lose the opportunity for inclusion. But it also loses credibility for the brand, because agents and LLMs are looking to also build credibility and confidence with brands. So this is where we just touched upon this, but what happens if you don't do anything? Well, you kind of lose your position to build that rapport with the agent as a credible brand. So consistency isn't just kind of data hygiene here, but it's the visibility of that data in multiple different sources. And what we see in terms of kind of when I'm speaking to clients and consulting on this is that many organizations still have such fragmented ownership as it pertains to brand and content holistically. E-com might manage certain elements of what goes on product pages for your own brand site and retailer external sites. Then you'll have marketing owning kind of brand messaging and how it shows up out there in both media and content. Legal on a separate matter, owning regulatory matters and claims. And then data is kind of sitting in multiple pockets, but it's not all able to become visible at once. And this is really where we're helping organizations, because that challenge and those silos need to be knocked down in order to ensure that as a business, you're consistently piecing together the right information and making it visible. This is just more important than it's ever been. We've always talked about kind of how silos are not helping organizations grow in the world of e-commerce. And we talked about that 15 years ago. And now we're saying, okay, with agentic, it's even more important because people are going to ask very general questions about your product that might rely on multiple pieces of data that don't actually portray as a collective.
I know we talk about silos a lot when it comes to consulting and the impact on an organization, but Tom, what are the kinds of systems or teams who would be housing data or involved in one way or another with creating, managing, distributing for something, or rather for a system that is fueling AEO and GEO?
Yeah, so I think you've just got to look to that suite of technologies that's long been sort of involved with the sort of lifecycle management for these different content types, right? So, ultimately, for web-based content, the structure of your CMS and how that is organized and managed and set up is sort of like the last mile. The last mile piece of evidence, for engines that are looking at, okay, well, I can sort of read this particular content, or I can understand what's in this image, but does the organization, the structure, the configuration of that CMS also back what I'm reading? And then you can work back from that as well. Content in a CMS, especially imagery, is likely to and should be managed in enterprise digital asset management platforms. Copy and content from CMS can also be managed in upstream systems, especially where it's modular and reusable and local, where it's subject to localization and translation. So these typically are the sort of the chain of systems that are applying information to imagery or to copy or to content sort of modules. And believe it or not, the engines are on the lookout for the indicators that this content is being effectively organized and managed upstream in alignment with the language and the structure that it's seeing when it's sort of doing its digital research on the content there as well. So obviously from a product perspective, we look at product information management and PXM systems, and ultimately through both those chains, whether it's product orientated or it's content orientated, we look to the very sort of most back office of systems in terms of master data management technologies to ensure that the taxonomies, the attributes, the data points that we're using to describe, to organize, to manage this content is sort of consistent across the different platforms that are in use. So you can really pull back from just the immediate tools that are used for that publishing capability, and in an integrated stack, the movement of this content through its life cycle and through its sort of application chain, is adding proof points and legitimacy and additional data that engines can use to increase the trust that they have in its relevance and its accuracy.
And from an organizational perspective, we're seeing kind of that content end-to-end starting to become more of a program across organizations, so that those silos start to reduce and there starts to be collective responsibility over various pieces of content, so that they do come together in a clear end-to-end process with governance and ownership. And that's primarily, been driven by the idea of ensuring that the digital shelf is up to date and accurate. But this just takes us to the more importance of why that coexistence of teams needs to be scaled, because without that, all the agent or the generative engine sees is just fragmented pieces of content. They have no concept that actually it exists, but it exists in different places. So it's really just bringing visibility together as an org is what you can start to do to scale.
So how do you know if you're ready? Either one of you.
I can go since I'm off mute. So there's various ways as an organization that you can kind of start to understand if you're ready. One of the first steps that we always say is okay, even just take a brand message or a product and think about the key 3 things that are important to it, and go ahead into ChatGPT yourself and ask, best waterproof jacket for hiking, and see if your product comes up, and ask another question, see if your product comes up. That's your first step. Like, what is my AI visibility on my product or brand today? Amazing if you're there, it means you're doing something right. Quite often brands and products aren't there yet. So you start to think, okay, well, why is it that they're not showing up? And it's likely because of a couple of areas that you could go back and focus on, which again, as Tom mentioned, are things in content operations that have been best practice for a long time. And so we're talking about the same areas here. So we're talking again about content quality, data architecture, and team structure, which we've kind of honed in on team structure and governance. But when we think about content quality, we're looking at clarity and answerability. Does our content directly answer those real user questions? And when you go in and you test in those environments yourself and you're not showing up, then we need to think about it. Well, is the content still built how it was originally built for, which is kind of brand first and marketing copy, versus in real life there to answer questions? Again, in terms of quality of content, thinking about the depth and completeness. So are those key attributes and claims and use cases fully covered and visible within that content? And that might be including things that you typically wouldn't include in a product title in order to show up better with an agent such as Rufus on Amazon. So it's really thinking about, well, what is the agent's looking for? If they are looking for real life answering questions, could it be to do with specific potential claims or characteristics or features? And is there gaps in the data that AI essentially aren't going to fill, and we're just not going to show up if we don't put those in there?
Tom, talk us a little more through how the data needs to be structured. What should we be thinking about when we say data architecture in order to expose the right content? Let's assume it's all perfect and consistent. How do we get it out there?
Well, I think that these things are I think consistent application of the right taxonomies and the right thinking about how they can be applied to different content types across the different types of applications that exist in your stack is sort of the number one challenge for any sort of enterprise data strategy. When I say enterprise data, I'm not talking about necessarily performance data or consumer engagement. I'm talking about the terms with which we use to classify and describe and categorize our content or copy against business entities, be that a product or be it a location, a venue, or a particular hotel brand, for example. So I think ensuring that we all are using the right terms of reference, that those terms of reference are systemized, and that the right governance to ensure that where new terms are required or changes to terms are required, that those changes are applied as universally as possible and in as synchronized a way as possible with the right change management and communication understanding around the business, so that everyone's clear on what means what and why it's changing. I mean, and that's so easy to say in 20 seconds, and yet is the life's work of data practitioners around the world. But I mean that's fun. That fundamentally powers how content and imagery and moving image are understood, not just by users within your business, but by consumers that are experiencing it through digital platforms, and also by the engines that are understanding it both on the surface level and understanding the meta properties behind it, and its sort of audit trail of its life cycle through your technologies. And I would just comment on or add something, I think, really to the concept of readiness. I think there's a very, very small number of people in the world that really understood the implications of LLMs and AI as we know it today at the time when they were sort of hitting the market. I think I don't think anyone was ready for the real impact of AEO and GEO at all, right? And actually, I'd go as far as to say that those that are sort of deemed to be pretty successful, mature, or advanced in terms of AEO and GEO today are only are only successful or successful to the extent that they are because they have been able to implement mature practices around enterprise data, content strategy, technology systems, and that sort of incidentally has set them up for success, in AEO and GEO. I think now there's a lot of focus, proactive focus on okay, how do we get better at this, and how do we present ourselves in the right way? And as Carla mentioned, these things come back to these really good practices. So I would say readiness is almost like it would be nice to have, how ready are we to start thinking about it and to start actioning things around it is sort of almost more pertinent. And I do think that I think we'll probably come on to this topic eventually, but I think the time is now. Even if the action isn't today, the thinking is now.
Speaking of readiness, and speaking of sort of the constant iteration of data that brands are receiving, content strategy also has to change as a part of this. It can no longer be you plan one campaign, you let it execute, you measure. You should be continuously creating the right content for your audiences. As you were saying, Carla, there are scenarios where you want to know what folks need to know about your product that you haven't yet created or exposed in the right way. What do we need to be thinking about here in terms of bringing those consumer signals back into the loop?
Absolutely. And that continuous optimization loop is absolutely key to being able to reiterate. And that is ensuring that there's also the right tech stack that feed off each other and are interoperable in order to send that feedback back to the data sources themselves, which is a very advanced way of thinking about content. So whereas people would react to, okay, this campaign's not worked for whatever reason, we need to go back and rehash it or think about it in a different way. There is signals from the digital shelf holistically and from understanding your LLM visibility and AI visibility that can tell you, okay, well, these were the gaps because I didn't show up for this. So instead of being in that campaign specific one-off mindset, you go into that always on optimization model. So there's also ways of thinking of leveraging agent workflows and generative AI to help you do that today as well. So dynamically taking those signals and optimizing content towards what it is that is needed to win in those environments. And you can do this by monitoring performance data today. So like, how often are you showing up? And if you start to drop between a certain threshold, you can signal a trigger to say, okay, well, we've now showed up less than is acceptable within this environment. It's similar to what you'd always done with SEO, like we've dropped rank, okay, we need to do something, we need to fill it with the latest keywords. Instead of it just being keywords, you're thinking about, okay, well, the consumer's mindset is asking for different things that we hadn't put in our product content. And so now we need to start thinking about that. And this really is just to summarize that it's going to be always evaluated and always live. And you can always, as a brand, continue to influence its performance based on understanding the signals of how it's landing with those new environments, whether it's generative or agent-led.
So recognizing that this is complex in terms of process, more complex in terms of content than it has been in the past, and more complex than it has been in the past in terms of tech, where are folks getting stuck? Let's start with Carla.
Yeah. So I think where I'm seeing brands, retailers, clients in general getting stuck is that they are focusing on adding exciting, shiny technologies that are driven by AI into their tech stack without thinking about the foundational data and ultimately the less sexy part, which is all the foundational governance, taxonomy, attribute completeness, elements that if you've ever spoken to any of us three, you'll know that we hammer on about, because really you can't do much if your data's rubbish to start with. And so you can't boil the ocean and prioritize everything at once, right? So common mistakes are, thinking about what technology do I need before the underlying problem. So, we like to think about, well, what does a roadmap really look like to improve in this area? And as we said, the ones that are successful are because they've already ticked off some of those foundational elements in advance and their organization was set up in order for data to be distributed and more visible everywhere. So which improvements would have the highest impact today and start, driving the right momentum? We typically do this thinking about, assessing the state of play today. Where are you on that maturity? And then driving a realistic roadmap based on that about where to start. And a lot of those starting points might be, okay, you've got a huge amount of attribute gaps, or your legal and regulatory claims isn't linking correctly through to the systems that house your product information, or your pricing and promo or supply chain out of stock information isn't reflected and linked to your product information. Because if a consumer's going in to an agent to ask for a certain type of product that they're ready and willing to buy, and then they click through to the product page and it's actually out of stock, it's not a great journey for the consumer. But the agent also needs that information to say, oh, well, actually, yeah, this product is available now. It's also on promo now. Whatever linking factors are going to drive that consumer to go through to purchase. So I've gone around about different things here, but we're just thinking about what is it that you can start with. And Tom, you've probably got something to add in thinking about this way of assessing your starting point.
Yeah, I think from an assessment sort of perspective, thinking really tangibly about that word assessment, the same tools that we're talking about are also your allies in doing that initial, bit of research. You can go and ask, these tools, how machine visible or how machine readable are X, Y, and Z, right? From my business perspective, and there's almost no one better to ask, in fact, than to go and go ahead and start, querying, along those lines. I would suggest that, that is one piece of the puzzle, right? I think, having a good understanding about, your data maturity, your governance practices, your tech setup, and being able to translate, the outputs of any assessment, AI driven or otherwise, into tangible next steps are critical. I think we'll talk a little bit about that shortly. But I do think that starting to get a baseline understanding of where you stand is very straightforward to do, and obviously the tools are out there to do that. But the other thing that I think it's worth talking about, and maybe it didn't quite fit in the last section, maybe it fits here, but I think that there is a lot of opportunity, for people within organizations that are trying to lead and drive applications or programs, be it digital asset management, be it product information management, be it master data or enterprise data, and that is like how these programs contribute to effective AEO and GEO strategy and conversion is quite a refreshing business rationale for the right level of investment in those programs, right? If things need to be done, technologies need to be replaced or investments required to advance their configuration, then AEO and GEO provide us like a measurable output. We know that users might be referred to different websites or through different purchase paths. We kind of know where that traffic is coming from, and being able to have a measurable impact on conversion in those channels can be a component of a compelling business case to ensure that you get the attention and the focus required to advance these supporting programs and technologies to the right level. So, I do think that that business case creation, prior to going ahead and doing anything substantive is important, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there for programs that have perhaps struggled to really demonstrate the bottom line impact of what they're doing, even though we all know it to be the case, right? We all know that these are must-haves and vital from an interconnectivity perspective and from a cost avoidance perspective. Now there's this sort of top line opportunity to perhaps start thinking around as well.
Carla, anything that you would add in terms of why you might want external support for this? Because I know a lot of our clients are building internal AI strategies. They're establishing this as a functional piece of work where an internal body is now responsible. Sometimes that's only one person, sometimes it's a team. But why might external support be key, especially as you're looking at sort of the beginning of building an AEO and GEO program?
Yeah, great question. And I think the common misconception is that hiring consultants means we kind of hand over a playbook and say, off you go. And actually, it's really about partnering and guiding you through the change management involved in this as well, because this is a new area for the business to both buy into, but it's a mindset change, as we talked about, in terms of different content needing to be displayed in different ways. So as agencies, advisors, consultants, we look to kind of build a clear strategy out of what is clearly a complex landscape. You only have to refresh your LinkedIn feed to see that there's another piece of news about what's happening with AEO and how it impacts your business, and how if you don't show up, you're going to lose all your market share. So it's taking away some of that extreme noise and fear into a real tangible way of building out a roadmap that is actually doable with the resourcing that you have. And to that point, also understanding, okay, is there resourcing gaps or expertise that we need as a business in order to drive us to this, to reach the goals that we have? Another way that we often act is also to help navigate within the organization. As Jeremy said, sometimes there's just one person tasked to kind of solve for GEO and AEO and magically build a reputation with all of these LLMs. But it really won't it'll take a lot more than just that one individual. So as consultants, we help you navigate, the right personas within the organization, and have some of those tough conversations with leaderships and execs to say, look, in order for this to be successful, this is the kind of team and expertise that we need. And probably the major one that you'll see on here is to support you avoiding costly mistakes, whether that's technical investment or mistaken process related. We've seen what can work and not work to date with various sizes of brands and retailers. And so we go in and we think about, if for your particular organization, where should that investment lie? And we talked about business cases already, but it's a really important aspect of, like, if we're going to get buy-in, we need to start to understand what is the expected ROI of such investments. To help you ultimately build that internal capability to scale with external support and guidance to drive you to the next stages.
So let's talk about the solution. And by solution, it could be lots of things, but let's talk about where we actually start, especially at ICP, in terms of building what a solution looks like. Obviously, as consultants, we tailor our work based on where our clients are at in terms of maturity, what your organization looks like, etc. But Tom, what's a realistic starting point? What kind of engagement would we first encourage folks to begin as they look at AEO and GEO as a program?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a well-trodden path, but I think that there is a need to understand the current state of play, and understand that in the context of what best practice looks like versus where you find yourselves today, or at least what is happening in the industry. What are we understanding from a competitive landscape perspective versus where we are? Because I think that is going to either highlight or dilute the urgency behind action, right? Let's not pretend otherwise, but certainly marketing organizations are under a huge amount of pressure. More and more things to do, more and more things to achieve, and not necessarily the pairs of hands to juggle it all at once. So ensuring that we can legitimately say that, hey, look, there's a gap to be closed here, and this is what our competitors are doing, or this is what industry good practice looks like versus where we find ourselves, is sort of the context setting for future work. And then I certainly think, and experience validates this, that gone are the days of setting out like a 12-month or an 18-month plan, whereby at the end of that period of time, value is obtained, right? I think that being able to pick apart one or two critical areas, capabilities, processes that could move the needle from an AEO and GEO perspective with demonstrable results is sort of like the real golden egg to try and identify early. Because I think, as you can imagine, within any business, if you're able to quickly and rapidly demonstrate that, hey, by putting and prioritizing some effort or some focus here, doing a specific piece of tactical work is going to drive a measurable increase in some kind of results or output, then the likelihood for a key stakeholder asking the question, oh, what could you do with more time? What could you do with a bit more investment? How much further could you push this? Is sort of the right pull conversation to be having about a particular initiative and how we maybe build more of a program around a broader set of milestones. So, I think that, this is not a revolutionary approach to these types of projects in general, but I certainly think that the nature of the outputs and the outcomes allow for good measurability, and I think we should sort of use that to our advantage here to get some quick wins under our belt, and then build the case for something a bit more medium or longer term in terms of ambition and vision.
Sure. And then, so recognizing, especially as our starting point may initially be, figuring out where we are and how we tell the investment story this for an organization, Carla, knowing how cross-functional all of this work is, how do we get teams aligned inside of the organization? What is it that we need to be talking to different folks about so they understand both how they are already involved, whether or not they realize it, and will invest the time and energy to turn it into something big?
And potentially this is the hardest part, right? So really setting the strategy around like, what are we trying to do together? So have those goals and shared metrics, but also have clear ownership. So if that means creating an agentic commerce steerco that has various stakeholders in different parts of the organization, it's really clear to have ownership and stakeholders and who's involved in what. So that might mean specific RACI models being created around different responsibilities within the program. And then when we think about shared metrics, so what matters to everybody involved? So you can't optimize what you're not measuring, right? So you need to figure out what is it that you're trying to optimize towards. And that might be shared metrics that are involved in specifically monitoring on the AI shelf. So that's, as we said before, like what is AI shopping surfacing? So go ahead and query Rufus, ChatGPT, start putting in like, where are we at today, but where would we like to get to, so that we can think about shared KPIs along the lines of a share of voice increase across a certain category, or recommendation frequency. So like, how often am I showing up for a certain query? And that allows you then to start to work towards like, what is it that you're going to try and improve with those shared metrics. Integrated workflows we've mentioned here, which is a tricky one as well. So what do we do between these teams to get them working together? How do we learn and adapt with different teams and with these regular feedback loops? So we talk about change management a lot, but it's critical here. So we're not just implementing a strategy for AEO, GEO. We're thinking about a shift in how teams are going to work together towards these shared metrics. And that's why having an ownership layer where there's buy-in at exec level into this being an important element to invest in is how you start to drive towards the same moving together as we've written here. So we see that kind of common blockers to success here is having unclear sponsorship or competing priorities between different teams. So you've not aligned on the same priorities and the same shared metrics. So really it's starting with clarity on what the problem is, building those internal champions and starting to celebrate whatever those early wins are, as small as they might be, as a group together.
I think with AEO and GEO, there is also this sort of elephant in the room a little bit that that people need a really good and confident understanding of what these things are, how they work, and how the business is currently impacted by its maturity or lack thereof, right? So there is this concept that that with a good understanding of where you stand, maybe it's via an audit or your own sort of assessment of current success or maturity, how can we articulate the importance of this to our colleagues, right? How can we make it real for them? How can we ensure that they understand the importance of it before going ahead and getting things like shared metrics and the right ownership established? Because I think this is new. It's a change. It's different. It's maybe an evolution from SEO to other EOs, but it still requires a little bit of education and understanding and patience with people as they sort of bring themselves up to speed with what this means.
You're on mute, JB.
You're on mute, JB. Sorry.
Sorry. Try to mute myself for coughing and sneezing because allergies are terrible in Atlanta right now, and then I forgot. So what does it look like to build a roadmap? How do we progress this from something foundational into something that is both programmatic and, as much as we can within any of our organizations, cutting edge? Let's start with Carla.
Tom was about to speak and just nodded. Yeah, we'll start with Carla. Perfect. So we've touched on some of this, and we talk about foundational work all the time, but essentially this is ensuring that your sources have consistent models, have full attributes, a unified taxonomy, and the structure to be able to scale to become visible in different places. So that's kind of the foundational approach that we take at the beginning, alongside the elements of change management foundation. So who needs to be involved? What changes it mean for them? How do we get them on this journey? And then we move into we've got the foundations in place, which is probably the biggest and the chunkiest part of work here, where we see a lot of gaps. And that gives you then your data advantage. So you want the data that is correct and visible. You then go into automating this as a process. So how do we ensure that the schema markup and the coding continues to be scaled, and that there's rules about how the frequency of that? Also technically developing the right APIs to expose content, and alongside all of that, ensuring that there's QA automation so that the accuracy of what you're doing across the data is constantly checked. And this goes back to that piece around this isn't a one and done action. This is going to be a continual evolution. And then as you start to look into phase 3, we think about optimization. So this is where we're going to have continual alignment, a very scaled and mature governance process as it pertains to all the data involved here, and monitoring. So when we talk about monitoring, this is by far today the hardest part, is attributing this change with it that AI brings towards business goals such as revenue, sales, etc. So we start to think about, well, what do those models look like, and how can we continue to look at tracking impressions, SKU level attribution, and any incrementality that we might assign that has been a benefit of the actions taken. Obviously, without this, you start to think about AI shopping as another cost center because you're investing in it. So you need to understand that there needs to be a measurable, scalable engine to continue to optimize and bring ROI. This is a super high level roadmap, but obviously there's a ton of detail behind each of these phases. Tom, is there anything you want to add on any of these critical stages?
Yeah, sorry.
No, go for it. I'm going to give you 1 minute.
Okay, sorry. I know that we're very
close. I want to make sure we can capture you.
Okay, so 2 super quick things then, JB. But firstly, from a foundation perspective, I think what are the objects and entities around which we want to orientate this data? Yes, okay, product families, product categories. That's a fairly straightforward one. But of different organizations outside of CPG, manufacturing, what are the things, the truths, the entities or objects around which you want to orientate facts, and there's a good example from the world of theme parks. Which locations do you want to prioritize, which zones of that park, which rides, these are all sort of entities and hierarchies that need definition, right? If it's not super straight, if it's not as straightforward perhaps as product categorization. And then from an automation perspective, I just remember that automation also includes integration, right? And the transfer and the flow of data as well. It's not just about brand new AI-driven things. It's also, hey, content and data flows, right? And automating how those things move. So it's just a couple of additional bits of context there.
Our favorite thing, interoperability. Do those systems actually work together, or can we make them do so?
Yeah.
So we've already really talked about what support and partnership looks like, beginning with an assessment, building a roadmap together, and executing against it with clear understanding of what you're looking to achieve and how to measure it. But what I really want you guys to talk about before we go, what would be your top 10 fixes to become AEO and GEO ready, and any closing thoughts that you have as you talk through that? Just name the most important ones from your perspective. You do not have to read that list.
Okay, I'll kick off again because I realize we've put 10 here, but I'll talk about 2 just to make it simple. So the structure of your product data, we'll always go back to this, but clean, complete, accurate, machine readable product catalogs, meaning that it's not just housed somewhere that can't be found by agents or LLMs. And then API accessibility. A lot of the protocols that run behind many of these generative engines have certain rule sets and requirements for API accessibility. So that's something to focus on from a technical perspective, because they're not just looking at product data from your website, but they're looking to draw it from the source as well to create the most accurate fact-based reasoning. So that's my 2. Tom?
Okay, if we're picking 2, then I'm going to go with number 2, right? Which I would expand to include master data strategy as well as global attribute and taxonomy. I think you can if you don't have this, I feel like nothing else matters. I think this is super critical to and foundational to getting it right. And then I would say 10, because I think in order to then move against the opportunity and get people going in the right direction, I think this idea of sort of program-driven KPIs and a team fully orientated, moving in the right direction, might mean you've got some of the bare components in place, but unless you've got 10, then it's a struggle to move things forward in a meaningful way.
So, conscious that we have about 2 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them. We are happy to pick them up now. But if you have additional questions, you can also drop them and we'll reach out to you and offer an answer. And you are welcome to reach out to any of us, and we are happy to answer. I'll pause briefly in case there are any questions, but I do have one question for both of you while we wait to see if there are any others. And just to note, folks, there are some materials that you can download from the webinar itself. But Carla, Tom, I am an organization. I have done almost nothing with AE and GEO. What happens if I don't try to tackle this in the next, I don't know, year? Even think about it. I just figure I'll deal with it in 2 or 3 years. Tom, let's start with you.
Well, I don't know anything about your business, so it's very tough to say. But what I would say is that all that happens really, what is true is that the gap between what you're doing to proactively address and engage with this channel and what your competitors may be doing is just widening, right? I just think that that is true, and also given the nature of some of the things that are required to really power forward with good AEO and GEO execution, means that these things aren't often like, hey, a week to do this, a week to do that. Some of these might require programs in order to set the foundations straight. So I do the gap widening is probably the what you're facing if you're not going to do anything for 12-18 months.
Yeah. Just to add to that, essentially something I mentioned earlier, but as agents develop brand associations over time, displacing an existing association is far more effort than earning it in the first place. It's a bit like how we talked about SEO. Like when SEO started, if you didn't jump on that, brands invested early, started to build reputations in search that lasted a very long time, and then brands that waited later found entrenched competition that they needed to start to beat out at higher cost. And I see the same dynamic now. So essentially getting in early builds that reputation, gives you your position with the agent, same way it would with SEO back in 2010 or so.
Amazing. Thank you both. We're at time. Thanks everyone for joining today.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks everybody.
Bye.
Bye everyone.
Bye.